Ethiopia and Tigray coming to a ceasefire, let's look at how we really got here. On Saturday, July 14, 2018, Eritrea's president, Isaias Afwerki, met with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia's capital of Addis Ababa. This was the first visit of an Eritrean diplomat in over 2 decades. This trip was one of the many in the normalization of relationships for the two neighbors that have been in a virtual state of war since the late 90s. This change, of course, was so monumental that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Geopolitically, the importance of this relationship to both nations is pivotal. Eritrea is the African version of North Korea. It is one of the world's highest active military members per capita, second only to North Korea. It is laden with precious metal ores such as gold, copper, and zinc, and it lacks developmental opportunities due to its small population and dearth of commercial relationships. Its identity is rooted in European colonialism on the Horn of Africa, colonized first by the Italians, then by the British. Demographically, it is a partition of the Tigrayan speaking people, where there are twice as many in Ethiopia than there are in Eritrea. On the Ethiopia side, we have the rising giant of Africa, who consistently ranks as having one of the top GDP growth rates in the world, benefiting from relatively low oil prices and demographic development, which was stifled by years of war in the late 20th century. All these opportunities, yet with a population of over 100 million people, Ethiopia is the most populous landlocked country in the world, fully lapping the second most populous with more than twice the population, another African country, Uganda. Ethiopia's population is set to double by the year 2050. As well, Ethiopia's primary access to the sea is rail through Djibouti, where Ethiopia accesses over 95% of its imports. This creates two geopolitical issues that are unacceptable. One is that rail is a more expensive mode of transportation than direct sea access. Regarding cost of business in Ethiopia, it will always have a layered markup for the tax incurred from importing its goods via infrastructure of another country. The second unacceptable issue is that over 90% of its imports come through one country. Djibouti is positioning itself as a global neutral on the Red Sea. For Ethiopia, the ideal position of a country as small and near as Djibouti is to heel to its larger neighbor. But by making itself a global center in the prized Red Sea, which controls the quickest routes from the littoral markets of the North Atlantic, Mediterranean Sea, and Indian Ocean, awards Djibouti international security as a global neutral player. It hosts foreign military bases from the US, France, and China. This is why the normalization of relations with Eritrea is so important. It neutralizes the dependency that Ethiopia has on Djibouti. It will put the ports of Djibouti in competition with the ports of Eritrea, driving down shipping rates to compensate for Ethiopia's inland status. In line of this major step towards territorial security, it was surprising to see Ethiopia's flippant attitude displayed towards Egypt and Sudan when they wanted a more community-based approach on the Nile River in light of the building of GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The dam will be based on the Blue Nile, which contributes over 80% of the Nile River flow. The Blue Nile meets with the White Nile, which flows from Uganda through South Sudan and merges with the Blue Nile in Khartoum, Sudan, where it then feeds into Egypt and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Ethiopia's insistence on building and filling the dam, which it sees as its prerogative, is an affront to Egypt, who sees Ethiopia's corralling of the Blue Nile as an existential threat. Ethiopia's persistence had led it in conflict with Egypt and Sudan, as well as the US. Egypt is the demographic linchpin of the Middle East. Nearly 1 out of every 4 Arabs in the world live in Egypt, and nearly 95% of Egypt's population live on the banks of the Nile, in a dry country where less than 3% of the land is arable. In a suspiciously timed act of misfortune, a secessionist movement broke out in the all too familiar Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. Ethiopia had to deal with putting this movement down amidst a $130 million aid suspension from the US, given to Ethiopia in response to lack of progress on resolving the dam dispute. It's at this moment that the lion state of Ethiopia needs to take a step back and reassess its priorities, especially as its capital's Addis Ababa hosts the headquarters for the African Union. Ethiopia, like most African countries, is a confederation of ethnic groups. Most prominent are the Amharas, Oromos, Tigrayans, and Somalians. The latter three all host to significant secessionist tendencies. Ethiopia does not have the resources nor the ally it needs to go it alone at this stage. At the Bantu Sun, we thoroughly believe Ethiopia will be one of the major powers of future Africa, if only it realizes that the power of a handshake shrinks that of a sword. To bring in Sudan and Egypt in a more advisory role and build a community of partnership and transparency around the Greater Nile is far more important at this stage than a pissing contest where you lack a bucket nor a window to throw it out of.